On the morning, everyone expected Seraphina Vale to marry the man chosen for her. She discovered the wedding was never about love. It was about ownership. Snow fell heavily over the luxury mountain estate overlooking Lake Tahoe, covering pine trees, stone terraces, and a long private road in white. Inside, floors adjusted arrangements. Staff moved between rooms, and wealthy guests arrived beneath heated awnings, as if nothing in the world could disturb the ceremony ahead. Seraphina stood apart from it all. At 26, she had spent her life surrounded by money influence and people who believed privilege should make obedience easier. Her family fortune had been built through shipping, real estate, and private investments. After her father died 2 years earlier, control had moved into a trust Seraphina could not fully access until she turned 27 or married. That condition had become the reason everyone pushed Preston Carrick toward her. Preston was 32, polished, respected, and almost unnaturally perfect in public. Seraphina had never loved him. Still, she had been told the marriage would stabilize Vale companies under pressure and protect hundreds of employees from financial collapse. She had nearly convinced herself that sacrificing happiness was different from sacrificing freedom. Then she found the documents. They had been left inside a private office near the bridal suite, partially hidden beneath financial reports. Seraphina read the first pages standing. By the end, she had sat down. The marriage agreement gave Preston immediate voting authority over her father's trust. Another section was worse. If Seraphina were judged emotionally unstable, Preston could request medical guardianship over portions of her personal and financial decisions. Suddenly, months of strained behavior around her made sense. Her mother repeatedly describing her as anxious, her Uncle Gideon questioning whether grief had affected her judgment, Preston encouraging doctors to document her stress. They had not been comforting her. They had been building a record. The most terrifying part of the wedding was no longer the man waiting to marry her. It was realizing nearly everyone she trusted had already prepared for what would happen if she tried to resist afterward. Seraphina did not confront anyone. She understood instinctively that anger would only give them evidence supporting the image they had created. Instead, she moved quietly. She removed the elaborate wedding gown, changed into fitted black trousers, a cream cashmere sweater, leather boots, and a tailored camel winter coat. She took cash, identification, her phone, and one object that had belonged to her father, an old brass key. She did not know what it opened. She only knew he had once kept it hidden separately from everything else. While guests gathered downstairs, Seraphina slipped through the estate service corridor and exited near the kitchens. Her absence was discovered within minutes. Preston did not respond like a wounded groom. Security vehicles moved before most guests even understood the bride was missing. Seraphina drove into worsening snowfall, following the mountain road away from the estate as visibility collapsed. Then headlights appeared behind her, a black SUV. It stayed close through every turn. Seraphina assumed Preston had already found her. Her tires lost traction on an icy curve. The car spun, struck a snowbank, and stopped. She ran. Branches tore her coat as she disappeared into the forest. Then another pair of headlights cut through the storm. A black SUV stopped between the trees. The door opened, and the man who stepped into the snow was not Preston Carrick. Seraphina had escaped one powerful man, only to be found by another whose name frightened people far more than Preston Carrick's ever had. The man stepping from the black SUV was Dante Rourke. At 34, Dante had built a reputation across the West Coast that made wealthy businessmen lower their voices when his name appeared. He was broad-shouldered, heavily built, disciplined in every movement, with dark hair, a light beard, and tattoos visible across both hands. He was also one of the most feared Mafia leaders in California. Dante had been traveling between legitimate resort investments when his convoy noticed Seraphina's abandoned car near the icy road. He recognized her immediately. The Vale Carrick wedding had never been simple society gossip. Preston's family had long maintained quiet connections to a rival criminal network, competing with Dante for access to private shipping routes. If Preston married Seraphina, he would gain influence over Vale assets, including docks capable of moving millions of dollars in cargo without attracting unnecessary attention. Seraphina understood none of that when Dante's men brought her from a freezing forest. She only understood that she had escaped one controlling man and landed inside another man's vehicle. The thought made her furious. Dante took her to a secluded mountain lodge farther from the main road. The property was luxurious without being flashy, built from timber and stone with enormous windows overlooking snow-covered mountains. A fire burned inside. Armed security remained outside. Seraphina warmed herself, recovered from the cold, and immediately tried to leave. Dante stopped that from happening. Not physically. He simply made it clear through his security that no vehicle would take her down the mountain while Carrick men were searching nearby. That distinction did little to calm her. Another man was still deciding where she could go. Yet Dante did not invade her space, touch her, threaten her, or pretend she owed him gratitude. That restraint unsettled her more than open intimidation might have. He rarely needed to raise his voice because everyone around him already understood what refusal could cost. Then Seraphina saw what Preston had done. Her disappearance had been reported as a mental health emergency. Public statements described her as emotionally unstable, overwhelmed by grief, and possibly incapable of making rational decisions. Local authorities had been told she had fled during a psychological crisis. The guardianship clause suddenly stopped looking like legal language. It looked like preparation. If police found her first, Preston would portray himself as a concerned fiancé trying to protect her. Dante's people uncovered something worse. Carrick contractors had been positioned around the wedding estate before Seraphina disappeared. They had not been hired merely to guard guests. Their job was to make sure the bride could not cancel the marriage and leave freely. That meant the plan had existed before she found the contract. Seraphina's suspicion moved toward Gideon. Her uncle had controlled nearly every logistical decision surrounding the wedding. For the first time, she wondered whether he had helped design the cage. Dante was equally disturbed by how far the scheme appeared to reach into lawyers, doctors, security companies, and respectable institutions. Seraphina had spent her entire life being warned that men like Dante were dangerous. Yet the first person to show her how completely her marriage had been engineered was the criminal she had every reason to fear. Before dawn, Dante received new intelligence. Preston Carrick had offered $1 million to anyone who brought Seraphina Vale back alive. By morning, Seraphina no longer knew whether Dante was keeping her prisoner or keeping everyone else from reaching her. The storm had buried the mountain roads beneath fresh snow, making escape difficult even without armed men watching the property. Preston's $1 million reward changed everything. Private investigators began searching nearby towns. Corrupt security contractors checked hotels, gas stations, and rental records. Criminal intermediaries who had never heard Seraphina's name before suddenly had a reason to find her. Dante responded by tightening security around the lodge. More vehicles appeared near the perimeter. Guards rotated positions. Every road leading toward the property was monitored. To Seraphina, it still felt like another cage. She tried arranging transportation herself using the phone and internet Dante had given her. He did not block her calls. He did not monitor her messages in front of her, but no outside driver was permitted through the gates. That distinction frustrated her because it was harder to hate. Dante was controlling the danger around her, not her thoughts. Then Seraphina called the attorney who had represented the Vale family for years. What she discovered destroyed another piece of her trust. He had already filed documentation supporting the claim that Seraphina was emotionally unstable. Her mother had also released a carefully written public statement describing her as confused, grieving, and vulnerable. None of it directly called her incompetent. It did not need to. The narrative was already being built. If ordinary authorities found her, she might not be treated as a woman escaping coercion. She might be treated as someone who needed to be returned to the people claiming responsibility for her. For the first time, Dante's lodge felt less like confinement and more like the only place Preston could not reach easily. Dante turned his attention to the brass key Seraphina had carried from the wedding estate. His people traced its markings to a private storage facility in San Francisco. The vault had been opened under her father's name years earlier and kept completely separate from official Vale accounts. That changed the meaning of the key. Her father had hidden something, and he had hidden it from his own family. Dante suspected he had anticipated a struggle over Seraphina's inheritance long before his death. Seraphina decided she would retrieve the vault herself. Dante agreed, but only under protection once the roads reopened. Something shifted between them after that. She began noticing that his men followed him with more than fear. There was loyalty there. Dante, in turn, stopped treating Seraphina like a wealthy runaway who needed rescuing. He recognized calculation beneath her anger when access to her financial accounts could have given him leverage over Vale shipping interests. He deliberately stayed away from them. That choice unsettled Seraphina more than greed would have. She had feared Preston because he wanted to control her future. Dante frightened her differently. He had the power to control it and kept choosing not to. Late that afternoon, a security camera detected movement near the lodge perimeter. A man was intercepted before reaching the house. He carried Vale family credentials. Seraphina recognized him immediately. He worked directly for Gideon. And once Dante's men uncovered why he had been sent, the entire arranged marriage changed meaning. Preston had never designed the plan. Seraphina's own uncle had. Seraphina thought her father had left her money. Instead, he had left her evidence powerful enough to destroy two families. Once the mountain roads reopened, Dante moved her discreetly from Lake Tahoe to San Francisco. The change in scenery felt almost unreal. Snow-covered pines gave way to steep city streets, historic stone buildings, and the gray-blue edge of the bay. They entered a private financial building through a side entrance, controlled by one of Dante's legitimate business contacts. No one followed them inside. At least, not yet. The brass key opened a secure underground deposit room that had remained untouched since Seraphina's father died. Inside were encrypted drives, trust amendments, photographs, shipping ledgers, and a handwritten legal memorandum bearing his signature. Seraphina expected financial instructions. What she found was a confession of suspicion. Her father, I believe Gideon Vale, was secretly selling access to Vale shipping routes. The record showed Gideon had partnered with Preston Carrick's father, using legitimate freight contracts to move illegal weapons and wash criminal profits through clean companies. Seraphina's marriage to Preston would have done more than merge two wealthy families. It would have merged control over the routes. And once Preston gained authority over her trust, Seraphina would have been legally weakened before she could challenge anything. Then she found the document that changed everything. Her father had rewritten the trust shortly before his death. Under the revised terms, Seraphina became sole controlling beneficiary at 27 whether she married or not. The version held by the family attorney was false, forged. That meant the entire arranged marriage had been built around a lie. But the worst discovery came from the financial records. A private physician had received a large payment from a Carrick Shell company only days before Seraphina's father died. The official explanation had always been a sudden heart condition. Dante recognized the doctor's name immediately from an old criminal investigation involving falsified medical reports. Seraphina stared at the records until the edges blurred. She had run from a marriage designed to steal her future. Now she had to consider that the same people may already have stolen her father's life. She did not collapse. That surprised Dante. So did what came next. Among her father's notes was a reference to a dock dispute from years earlier. Dante knew the incident. Seraphina's father had once stopped a violent confrontation between Dante's organization and innocent dock workers by quietly rerouting a shipment and absorbing the financial loss himself. Dante had owed him ever since. That debt explained part why he had protected Seraphina. Only part. When Seraphina gathered the evidence, Dante did not take it from her. He did not copy the trust records for leverage. He placed every drive, ledger, and document back under her control. That choice mattered more than she wanted it to. Trust began where fear had been. Then Dante's security team detected movement inside the building above. Carrick men had entered through a secondary access point. Someone had given them the location. Dante's expression hardened. Only a handful of people in his organization had known where Seraphina was being taken. The betrayal had come from inside his own ranks. And before they left the vault, Dante learned exactly who had sold her location. One of his most trusted captains had handed Seraphina to Preston. Dante had protected Seraphina from her family, but now protecting her meant confronting a betrayal inside his own. He moved her from the financial building to his exclusive waterfront club overlooking San Francisco Bay. The property looked legitimate from the outside. Glass walls, private dining rooms, expensive cars arriving beneath a covered entrance. But the upper floors had reinforced doors, private elevators, controlled access, and enough trusted security to withstand an attack. By late afternoon, Dante knew who had betrayed him. Miles Keaton, one of his senior captains. Miles had served beside Dante for years, managing territory and enforcing rules across several port operations. He had also been secretly negotiating with the Carricks. The reason was simple. Miles believed Dante had become too selective. Dante still ran extortion, smuggling operations, and violent enforcement. He was not pretending to be innocent, but there were lines he refused to cross. Human trafficking was one of them. Miles saw that refusal as weakness. Seraphina watched Dante confront the consequences of betrayal from behind the club's secure upper level. For the first time, she saw clearly what his power actually meant. Men lost positions because he ordered it. Businesses changed hands because he decided they would. Fear followed him naturally. Dante never tried to hide that truth from her, and Seraphina refused to romanticize it. Saving her from Preston did not erase the violence in Dante's world. That realization made her attraction to him more complicated, not less. Miles was stripped of authority and detained by Dante's own men. Dante could have had him killed immediately. He did not. Seraphina's presence had already turned a private betrayal into a wider conflict, and Dante understood that one execution could start a war with the Carricks. The restraint did not save Miles. Carrick assistants helped him escape before nightfall. Hours later, Preston made his move, not personally. An intermediary arrived with an offer. If Seraphina returned voluntarily, the public claims about her instability would disappear. Her family would stop pursuing guardianship. In exchange, Dante would keep control of his port territory. The offer was designed to expose exactly what Seraphina feared most, whether Dante valued her or the empire more. He rejected it immediately. Seraphina learned afterward that surrendering her could have protected millions of dollars in Dante's operations. He chose to risk all of it instead. That changed something between them. At first, Dante had kept her close because she was strategically important. Now his concern had become personal. Seraphina could see it in the way security shifted around her, in the way he watched exits before entering rooms, in the way his attention changed whenever her safety was mentioned. That frightened her. Not because she felt nothing, because she felt too much. She had escaped one cage already. She would not walk willingly into another simply because this one was built by a man she trusted. So Seraphina decided hiding had to end. Using her father's records, she contacted a federal prosecutor connected to an older port investigation. A meeting was arranged. For the first time, she was preparing to expose Gideon and Preston on her own terms. Then Dante's security chief entered with new information. Seraphina's mother had disappeared from the Vale estate. A message had been left behind. The instructions were simple. Seraphina had to come alone, or her mother would die. For the first time since escaping her wedding, Seraphina chose to walk toward the men hunting her. This time, no one had forced her. The abandoned coastal mansion near Half Moon Bay had once belonged to her father. Years earlier, it had been a family retreat overlooking the Pacific. Now it had been chosen as a trap. Seraphina insisted on going because her mother's life might depend on it. Dante hated the plan, but he did not stop her. Instead, he placed surveillance teams far enough away to avoid detection and arranged a discreet transmitter linked to both the security network and the federal contact Seraphina had already approached. It was the first time his protection did not come with confinement. Seraphina entered alone. Inside, she found her mother frightened but alive. The reunion brought no immediate comfort. Her mother admitted she had known the marriage to Preston was financially motivated. She had believed it would preserve the Vale name, stabilize the companies, and prevent scandal. But she had not known Gideon had forged trust documents or prepared guardianship provisions against Seraphina. That distinction mattered. It did not erase the betrayal. Her mother had still chosen reputation over her daughter's freedom. Seraphina refused to pretend otherwise. Preston appeared soon after. His interest in her finally became clear. He had never been obsessed with Seraphina herself. He had been obsessed with what her name could unlock, her signature, her legitimacy, her inheritance. Gideon had gone further. He had spent years manipulating Vale finances, burying evidence, and protecting the network connected to Seraphina's father's death. Seraphina kept him talking. Every accusation, every justification, every detail moved through the hidden transmitter. She had spent her entire life believing survival meant escape. Now survival meant standing still long enough to make powerful men reveal exactly who they were. Then Preston noticed the transmitter. Everything changed at once. Carrick security moved in. Dante's team lost visual contact when interior cameras were disabled. Gideon placed emergency trust documents in front of Seraphina and attempted to force her signature. She refused, even when the threat became physical. The woman who had fled her wedding in fear was gone. Seraphina no longer wanted to escape her name. She wanted it back. Dante entered only when the situation crossed into immediate danger. His men moved through the mansion in a short, controlled confrontation with Carrick security. No chaos, no unnecessary bloodshed. Seraphina reached her mother and secured the transmitted evidence, while Dante's team isolated Gideon. Preston escaped through an old coastal service tunnel before the perimeter closed. Gideon was injured during the struggle, but survived. Federal agents arrived minutes later because enough of Seraphina's recording had transmitted to establish probable cause. For the first time, Gideon Vale was no longer untouchable, but the victory lasted only seconds. Dante's team discovered that Preston had copied part of the Trust archive before escaping. The stolen data gave him one remaining path to power, and he was already heading toward the annual emergency board meeting, where control of the Vale Empire could still be decided. Seraphina had escaped a wedding in fear. Days later, she entered Vale's shipping headquarters, knowing every person inside expected someone else to decide her future. The emergency board meeting had been called after Gideon's arrest created a leadership crisis. Preston intended to use that chaos. He arrived with forged marriage agreements, proxy votes, and documents supporting the claim that Seraphina was emotionally unstable and temporarily unfit to control the trust. Then Seraphina walked into the room herself. It was her first public appearance since disappearing from the wedding. The effect was immediate. She did not look confused. She did not look fragile. She looked prepared. That alone damaged the story Preston had spent days building. Dante remained outside the formal meeting. He had men nearby, but he did not enter the room as her protector. This battle had to belong to Seraphina. She placed the original trust amendment her father had hidden before the board. Independent forensic specialists had already verified the signatures, paper trail, and digital records. The document held by the family attorney had been altered. Federal investigators immediately moved to freeze all disputed voting rights tied to the fraudulent version. Then Seraphina presented the financial records connecting Carrick Shell companies to the physician who treated her father before his death. Her mother publicly supported the investigation. That mattered, but it did not erase the months she had spent helping pressure Seraphina toward the marriage. Some betrayals could be acknowledged without being forgiven. Preston tried one final tactic. He exposed Seraphina's connection to Dante Rourke. The accusation was designed to poison her credibility. A Mafia king had protected her. That was true. Seraphina did not deny it. She also did not pretend Dante's criminal world was harmless. Her legal rights did not disappear because the man who helped save her happened to be dangerous. That distinction changed the room. Board members who had hesitated began shifting support. Preston's proxy strategy collapsed. His forged agreements became liabilities instead of weapons. Federal agents entered before the meeting ended. The charges waiting for him included conspiracy, coercion, fraud, and offenses connected to her mother's kidnapping. Preston tried to leave through a restricted executive corridor. Dante's men were positioned nearby. They could have stopped him permanently. Dante ordered them not to interfere. He allowed federal officers to take Preston alive. That choice protected the evidence and proved something Seraphina had not expected. Dante was changing too. By sunset, Gideon's conspiracy had effectively collapsed. Seraphina became a controlling head of her father's trust. The arranged marriage was finished. Legally, financially, emotionally, for the first time in years, no man held authority over her future. And that freedom created one final uncertainty. Dante no longer had a strategic reason to keep her near him. The danger had passed. The hunt was over. Freedom meant more than escaping Preston. It meant discovering whether Dante could care for a woman he was no longer required to protect. That evening, Seraphina learned Dante had already ordered every member of the security team removed from around her home. Seraphina had spent the entire story fighting men who refused to let her choose. The final test was whether Dante would become one of them. Several weeks passed after Preston's arrest. Gideon and Preston both faced federal cases involving fraud, coercion, conspiracy, and financial crimes. The investigation into Seraphina's father's death remained open, but evidence increasingly connected Carrick money to the physician who treated him before he died. Seraphina turned her attention to Vale shipping. She removed shell companies tied to illegal activity, replaced compromised advisors, and created new governance rules preventing any future spouse from automatically gaining control over the family trust. For the first time, her name belonged to her again. Her mother remained in her life, but forgiveness came slowly. Trust could be rebuilt. It could not be rewritten. Dante stayed away. His security disappeared from around Seraphina's home. No black SUVs waited across the road. No men watched from neighboring properties. No one monitored where she went. The irony was impossible to miss. When Seraphina had wanted to run from him, Dante refused to let her walk into obvious danger. Now that she was truly free, he refused to trap her with gratitude. Dante had his own consequences to face. Removing Miles fractured parts of his organization. Rejecting profitable partnerships connected to trafficking cost him money and influence. He was still involved in smuggling, extortion, and violent enforcement. He had not suddenly become innocent. Seraphina understood that loving him would never mean pretending otherwise. That was why she chose the next step herself. She invited Dante to the restored Vale family house overlooking the Pacific. By sunset, the ocean reflected gold beneath a clear sky. Dante arrived without a convoy surrounding him. For once, he entered Seraphina's world without trying to control the perimeter. Their resolution was not immediate. Seraphina had fought too hard for independence to surrender it in the name of romance. Her company remained hers. Her movements remained hers. Her identity remained hers. Dante accepted those boundaries without negotiation. That mattered more than any promise could have. Their relationship began only after Seraphina no longer needed rescuing. Dante also began separating some legitimate businesses from the most violent parts of his organization, not because Seraphina demanded instant redemption, but because he had finally understood something she had learned the hard way. Control without choice was still a cage. Preston had wanted her because marriage gave him power. Gideon wanted her controlled because her inheritance threatened him. Dante at first kept her close because enemies would have killed her. In the end, he proved what she meant to him by giving her the freedom to walk away. Seraphina did not. She stood beside him outside the restored house as the Pacific darkened beneath the sunset, not because anyone had arranged it, demanded it, or purchased a right. She stayed because she chose to. Then a courier arrived at the front gate. The sealed envelope bore the name of her father's former attorney. Inside was a warning written before his death. The Carricks had never been the only family watching the Vale inheritance.